whose are you? Now, that's not a question we're used to being asked, is it? We're used to being asked, who are you? But whose are you? Or asked another way, to whom do you belong? And what difference does it make? Now, the answer to that question seemed to make a difference to God in our first reading from the book of Exodus. You're following along in your missals, or would you like to take one of the Bibles out? We're looking at Exodus chapter 32, beginning with verse 7. Now, the scene is Moses is at the top of Mount Sinai, and he has been up there for quite a while receiving the commandments from God. Meanwhile, at the base of the mountain, the people have grown impatient, and they have now fashioned for themselves a golden calf, who they now are worshiping as their God, their idol. And as you can imagine, God is not pleased. And listen to what he says to Moses, and particularly how he refers to the people. At verse 7, the Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once, because your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted corruptly." And later he says, "Let me alone then, that my anger may burn against them to consume them. Then I will make of you a great nation." God is furious. He is so furious that he no longer considers the people his. Notice, "Go down to your people, whom you brought out of Egypt." In his fury, he no longer sees his relationship with the people. And Moses picks up on this, and Moses turns the table on God. If you look at verse 11, he implored the Lord his God, saying, "Why, O Lord, should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a strong hand?" He reminds God that these people are God's people, and that it was out of his love and his power that God brought the people out of Egypt. And he goes on and even reminds God that he made the promise to Abraham to make of him a great nation, not of Moses. And having been reminded of his relationship with the people, that they are his own, the story ends at verse 14 telling us, "So the Lord changed his mind about the punishment he had threatened to inflict on his people." You see, when we feel disconnected to the people, to another, it's easy for our anger to flare and to put them off. You see, we have really the same dynamic going at work in the gospel today. Now, the gospel, we're looking at Luke chapter 15. We heard a series of 3 parables. The parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son, which we today call the prodigal son. We're not going to look at all the parables. In fact, I just want to look at the very end of the story of the prodigal son. You'll remember that the prodigal son returns home. The father is overjoyed with his return and throws a big party. And when his older brother comes back, he refuses to enter the house because of what has happened. And so the father comes out to plead with the older son to come and join the celebration. And in response to his father, the older son says at Luke 15, verses 29, "Look, all these years I served you, and not once did I disobey your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat to feast on with my friends. But when your son returns, who swallowed up your property with prostitutes, for him you slaughtered the fattened calf." Notice it's your son. He does not see himself in relation to his brother. And so, like Moses, the father turns it on him again. And he says to him, "My son, you are here with me always. Everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found." The father appeals to the older son's sense of relationship, hoping that if he can see the younger brother as his brother, he will be able to show the compassion that he asks of him. Does he go in? We don't know. But we do learn an important lesson from this parable and from the book of Exodus. That when we see ourselves as unrelated to others, as disconnected to them, then it is easy to dismiss them, to resent them, and even to hate them. But when we see ourselves in relationship to each other, when we see ourselves as belonging to each other, then there is hope that we can show the compassion and the mercy and the love that God calls from all of us. This week marked the 18th anniversary of the terrorist attacks on 9/11, if you can believe that it's been 18 years. And after all these years, when we reflect on that, all that has happened, we can see how that event brought out the best and the worst in us. When Americans saw themselves in relationship with the victims of the September 11th attacks, we were at our compassionate best. The heroic efforts to save those caught in burning buildings, the generosity in raising money and giving blood for those in need, the outpouring of prayer for all of us. When we see ourselves as related to one another, as belonging to each other, it's amazing what we can accomplish. But when we define other people as unrelated to us, we also witness how ugly we can become. Political leaders to this very day have used 9/11 to demonize Muslims and people of Arab descent in order to achieve their own political purposes. One of the first things the Trump administration did was to ban certain people from certain Muslim-majority countries from entering our country. Political opponents of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar have portrayed her against the backdrop of the smoldering Twin Towers, claiming that her mere election is evidence that we have forgotten 9/11. When the president and others demonize immigrants as rapists, murderers, and drug dealers, they're doing the same thing to designate certain people as other, and to foment fear and hatred toward them. African Americans and Baltimoreans are not far behind when we're characterized as less than human because we live in cities infested with rats and plagued by crime. The best way to create fear and hatred and opposition is to portray people as wholly unrelated to us. Unless you think that technique is limited to politicians, pay attention to your own language around people you dislike. Have you ever referred to someone as that woman, that son of yours, those kids? How many of us have refused to refer to Donald Trump as our president? Because after all, I didn't vote for him. He's not my president. Same thing, folks. If we create a break, a disconnect between us and others, we justify our anger, our opposition, and even our hatred toward another. But all of that changes when we envision ourselves in relationship with others. Because if we see ourselves as related to another, then even if we disagree, it's harder to demonize them. It's harder to demonize someone who is part of you, someone who belongs to you, someone to whom you yourself belong. By now, I hope that most of you know that St. Bernardine's has joined Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development, also known as BUILD. And a fundamental tenet of BUILD is that people organize best when they organize around relationships, not issues. You see, if we organize around an issue, then eventually we're bound to break up. We'll either accomplish the goal and have no need to remain together, or we'll fail at our goal and we'll split up out of frustration. But when people develop personal relationships, then they're more likely to stick together for the sake of that relationship. We'll more likely come to a meeting or agree to a task if we're asked by someone with whom we have a personal relationship. And we'll more likely hold ourselves accountable to each other, doing what we promise to do, if we know we have a personal relationship. And so at the heart of BUILD is learning how to engage people one-to-one. Not so much talking to that someone, but listening to them. We try to understand first and foremost what they are interested in, what they care about. And then we try to see if and how we can ally ourselves with their interests. But you see, when we walk around people we don't know, whether we do it right here in church or whether we do it out on the streets, we do nothing to create a relationship. When we tell someone with whom we have no relationship that they should come to our church or that they should participate in this event, we are not listening and learning about their interests. We're telling them about our interests. We mean well, but we do that to young people all the time. We tell them what we think they should be interested in, without first getting to know them and learning about what they're interested in. And sometimes their interest has nothing to do with church, and that's okay. Because if we can create relationships with others by taking an interest in them and showing that we can be their ally, then maybe down the line they'll take an interest in us. Because when people feel like they belong to each other, it's amazing the love and compassion and kindness they can show to each other. And we can all work on this. even if we don't participate in build. Look around you. Is there someone that you don't know here? You've seen them all the time, but you've never learned their name? Take a moment, introduce yourself, and learn their name. Or look around. Have you noticed that there's someone who used to be coming but next to you and they're not here anymore? Find out who they are. Reach out to them. Ask us at the staff if you're not sure who they are. We'll help you make a connection. Because when people feel connected to each other, when we feel like we belong, we're much more likely to show love and compassion. So whose are you? To whom do you belong? Because it matters whether we see ourselves in relationship to each other as belonging to one another. It made a difference to God and the Israelites, and it made a difference to the father of the prodigal son. It can make a difference to you and me. Amen.